Welcome to Stay Fearless, the FSP podcast with all things baseball performance. I am your co-host and co-founder of Fearless Sports Performance, Joey Hanley.
And I'm your co-host and co-founder, Dr. Alex Acevedo, and welcome to another episode of the pod.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Stay Fearless, the Fearless Sports Performance podcast. Today we are joined by the CEO of Proteus Motion, Sam Miller, and the VP of Human Performance and Customer Success of Proteus Motion, and Doctor of Physical Therapy, Will Waterman. If you have not heard of Proteus, they have developed a revolutionary performance testing and resistance training tool. Sam and Will, we could not be more excited for this conversation and to share your insights with our listeners.
Super glad to be here, guys. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, can't wait to get into this. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you guys. And so for our listeners that don't know so much about Proteus, haven't really looked into it too much or seen it, we'd love to hear kind of your explanation of what Proteus is, how you guys have gotten to where you're at with Proteus, and where you guys see yourselves moving in the future.
Absolutely. Happy to talk about it. And Will and I, Will, Will Waterman, who's joining, is our Vice President of Customer Success and Industry Solutions, has been around since the very beginning with me. So you got the right guys here to talk about it. But yeah, Proteus Motion is a company that's really pioneering a really interesting space and moment in time in physical strength and power. We have developed a hardware and a software that is currently used by close to 500 commercial facilities, from commercial gyms to physical therapy clinics, chiropractic, pro and college sports teams, and all the above, that purchase our hardware and software to effectively deliver precision services around athletic training, fitness, and physical therapy. You could think about Proteus, I think, most simply as it's like your one-stop shop for strength and power assessment. That is driven by a series of inventions that we've patented that provide the first ever way to be able to quantify multiplanar movement around, especially for strength and power. And we've rolled that into a software product that has a library of standardized assessments with infinite kind of capabilities in terms of what movements you can test. But just as an example, one of our most popular ones is a general power test that involves upper body, lower body, uniplanar, multiplanar movements. It's like 15 movements that a user completes in 5 minutes. And the output of that test or evaluation are things that include: what's your biological power age? How do you compare to someone like you or any given demographic? Which is really important because all of our systems are cloud-based, so they're drawing from 1 billion data points that we've captured over the years. That's the world's largest database for multiplanar power. Our assessment reports kind of reveal across the entire body what areas of strength, weaknesses does an individual possess, where are they improving, how are they changing, imbalance, and some hyper-personalized insights around, well, what do you do and how, including some new features that we've developed where you can actually output a multi-week hyper-personalized program. The way that Proteus is used in a lot of these facilities is it's basically the data hub that helps inform decision-making around programming. Where do you stand? How do you compare? How are you changing or improving? Which is incredibly powerful from a motivation standpoint, from a progress tracking standpoint, and really elevates the quality and level of services that can be provided at a facility, as well as like monetization opportunities. So primarily, we're a performance assessment tool with totally differentiated and unique capabilities that are hyper time efficient and precise. And secondarily, Proteus provides a totally new resistance training modality. So one of the key parts of or foundations of the technology is that we created a new machine that, if any listeners are wondering what this is or what it looks like, go to proteusmotion.com. You can see what this looks like. It's roughly the size of a treadmill. You can perform any conceivable movement on it, and it provides a resistive force that is very much unlike a cable machine or a free weight. It's derived from magnets, and it's constant force. We call it 3D resistance. 3D resistance is constant in all planes and directions. It's like a force field. It feels like moving underwater, and you can change the viscosity of the fluid. And this has two benefits. It provides a totally unique, or it basically is a tool in your toolkit that's a totally unique a stimulus that has incredible benefits, ranging from, it's very low impact to in high neuromuscular activation, but it's like the ultimate tool for training, triplanar power and speed. But constant force in all directions also means that we're able to measure strength and power for a multiplanar movement, right? Strength is the ability to move against a force. So if you were trying to evaluate strength for a multiplanar movement, you need multiplanar forces, and that doesn't exist. That's what 3D resistance is. So it's a huge unlock on that front. And yeah, currently today, I started the company in 2016. First 4 years was like R&D, heavy R&D, patenting with a really small team, building prototypes. And that was, the first 4 years. And then we basically have grown from about 25 machine installs in 2021 to close to 500 today, almost entirely through word of mouth. We have an enviable roster of clients ranging across these different segments. And we've got about 75,000 users that range from age 8 to age 98, including some of the best athletes in the world across all major sports. So I'll pause there. That's kind of, I guess, in a nutshell, what we do. And happy to tell you how we got here, of course, but it's a really interesting moment in time where, physical strength is now a biomarker, right? It's no longer confined to bodybuilding and elite athletics. It matters for everyone. That's been established, and we're really at the forefront of this emerging space as it becomes, I think, understood in a mainstream population, the importance of physical strength for health, movement, and longevity.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough to be able to kind of demo the Proteus and being able to kind of see how efficient and easy and user friendly it is to perform those assessments. And I think we did the Cressy performance assessment. And being in the baseball world, Cressy's obviously a big name, and I know you guys do a lot of work with him. Really cool to kind of see the different movements, assessments, and stuff like that, and be able to test movements that have never been able to truly be tested as accurately and effectively as you guys are able to do it with the Proteus. And so definitely a tool, I think, for a lot of guys that's extremely interesting, extremely useful, helpful, and something that I think is going to open a lot of doors in kind of the baseball performance world. Being able to assess and, being a PT, and kind of seeing that mindset, that kind of world way of thinking. Assessment is so important, whether that be initial assessment or constantly reassessing, because of course, if you don't know where you are in the map, it's really hard to kind of get where you need to go and know how to get there. And so kind of my question for you is, and this is just kind of my PT mind working, is how can that be integrated then? Because at least the test that we saw was kind of that initial performance test of like, okay, where are we performance wise? But it's like, all right, how can that be integrated into, especially baseball, into like the rehab process, whether that becoming, post surgery and reassessing as we move forward kind of through that rehab process? And are there plans to kind of dive deeper into that world and that timeline?
Well, being that I'm the PT of the two of us, I'll jump in on that one. So yeah, I mean, You hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people perceive us as just a performance testing device for athletes, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, we actually, I can't remember the last time I checked what the actual numbers were, but I want to say, and Sam, you can correct me, like 30% of our sites are PT facilities, something like that, PT and medical ish, somewhere in that range. And we're used both for athletes, but also for just your average patients that are coming in with all kinds of different injuries, shoulders, back, etc. But if you're talking specifically how you use it for athletes, and how, again, that informs how you'd use it for, I think of everyone as an athlete, even people that aren't competing in athletics. Everyone who has a body is some sort of athlete. You use Proteus to assess where that patient is compared to the norm of who they are. We have this massive database, as Sam mentioned, over 75,000 users. Yes, that's a lot of athletes that we have in there, but we also have, our fastest growing segment is middle-aged folks, right? Just middle-aged, quote unquote non-athletes. They don't play a specific sport, is what we mean by that. We have that normative database. They can immediately see whatever movement they test, how that compares to other people that have done the same movement at the same resistance, that are their same age, weight, height. They can add as many filters as they want. So we have this normative database to see how do they compare to where they should be. But then also, just like every other test in physical therapy, as you know, you can test the injured limb against the uninjured limb and see how that compares, right? You can compare left to right. We always have bilateral comparisons. So there's the testing element of where you're using it to assess a baseline and check their progress as they go through their rehab progress, right? You can see, are they making those gains in power, in strength? We actually measure range of motion as well. It's not in degrees like, as physical therapists like it. It's actually distance traveled, but you can still measure that. And then you can actually use it, as Sam mentioned, as a resistance training tool to actually train an athlete to move more efficiently. So because of 3D resistance giving you this constant resistance in all directions, it's a phenomenal neuromuscular re-education device. So if you're going to do something like shoulder flexion, shoulder scaption, something like that, or PNFs, it teaches you how to not only activate those muscles needed to move in those patterns, but also to stabilize throughout that entire movement, because it's sort of kind of a hybrid movement between open chain and closed chain. So it's kind of a hybrid of those two things. So it helps to provide stability to the person as they're moving through the range of motion, while at the same time challenging them to provide force in 3 dimensions. So it really is a unique stimulus that can be used really early in the rehab process. So we have people that'll use it earlier than they can do normal resistance training, because it's a lot like aquatic therapy, and the same stimulus you get there. You can do it really early in the rehab process without risk to injuring the tissue, because it's essentially, it can be used almost as like a concentrically biased exercise. So it's very safe on healing tissue, but then you can use it all the way up to return to play. They're ready to, they're trying to work on peak power outputs that they need for their sport. You can use it for training that as well as assessing that as well. So you really can use it throughout the entire life cycle, or, of someone going through rehab.
Now, you guys have a massive database. I believe it's 75,000 plus users that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Within that database, have you guys been able to, or do you have, I guess, a percentage number of people that you've been able to catch an early injury, either, off season, mid season, that you've been able to kind of say, like, okay, this guy's performance is down, let's put him on the Proteus, or maybe another organization did that and they've caught injuries, before they happen?
Yeah, it's certainly something. I'll jump in here. It's certainly something that we hear it's being used for with because you can test more frequently with Proteus than you can other devices. So you can almost use it as like a readiness check and monitor athletes throughout their season and see how is that power changing over time. So you can use it for that. As far as like me being able to sit here and like say this many sites have caught this many injuries, we don't have that data yet. It's something that a lot of the organizations as you know, some of them keep private, you know, and they don't necessarily share, especially some of our clients that are working with major league or, you know, professional teams. But also, as you can imagine, it's kind of a tricky thing to gather in the real world, but something we're definitely keen to, you know, learn more and gather more data on, and try to make those conclusions, because it's definitely going to be out there. I mean, we already see our correlations to performance. It makes sense that we'd also see it to a decrease in performance and therefore risk of injury. You know, there's definitely a relationship there, but being able to, like, you know, find the hard data for it, that's the next step.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're just to add on to that too. Ton of, you know, tremendous amount of anecdotes on that front, and this is one of the things that I think has been propelling a lot of the word of mouth growth that we've had kind of organically over the years. But I think we've always been really careful about you know, different claims and how we make promises about the product. And so I think that's evolved over the years, because when we first started to get Proteus machines out into commercial environments, we were super excited about the ability to be able to quantify these movements really for the first time ever, right? So, you know, and that's been an attraction for really any facility, business, or organization that cares about power and cares about rotation and multiplanar movement. Like, you have to get a Proteus done. And we got him out in the field, and it's, you know, we realized, like, people actually didn't, this is in 2019, I think, people actually really didn't care very much. And the reason was because they didn't know how to use it or what it meant or what the references were, or the comparison. And so that's changed recently, because we've built this, you know, database. It's now more than 1 billion data points. It's the world's largest on multiplanar power. And these new norms, you can actually employ that database to compare yourself to different demographics and make sense of it and draw meaning from it. And we're really just getting started on this front. So I think right now it's a hugely valuable tool that empowers a trainer, coach, clinician to be able to very quickly, precisely, and easily make informed decisions with easy to understand information that they otherwise wouldn't be able to access. So we like to say that it would take 20 pieces of equipment in a lab in 3 hours of time to get 10% of what we do in 5 minutes.
Hey everyone, Dr. Alex Acevedo here. As you know, I'm a co-founder of Fearless Sports Performance, as well as a performance coach and physical therapist. I want to take a quick moment to talk to you about how Fearless Sports Performance has been a game changer for countless athletes. Whether you're a seasoned pro or a novice with minimal training experience, our mission at Fearless is to help you reach your maximum potential. We do this through individually customized performance training programs tailored specifically to you. From detailed biomechanics assessments to personalized, all-encompassing performance training programs, we've got everything you need to elevate your game. If it's a contributor to your performance, it will be included in your program. Plus, we make it easy for you to train with us from anywhere, whether you're local to our Thousand Oaks, California location or joining us remotely. We've got you covered. We utilize the Fearless Training app, where you'll find all your workouts, instructional videos, and more right at your fingertips. And above all, we prioritize making sure every Fearless athlete feels as if they are the most important athlete we train. So if you're serious about elevating your performance, head over to fearlesssportsperformance.weebly.com and see how we can help you become truly fearless in your sport. Now, back to the show.
Mm-hmm. And then with the assessments that you guys have come up with, you know, based on performance, what came to the conclusion that, you know, because when we did the Cressy test, we did, you know, push, pull, the shot put, you know, all of those. What came to the conclusion of, like, these are the tests that correlate to this sport or, you know, ultra sports the most?
So, Will, you take this, but it started with some guessing, and then it's
that's exactly right. I mean, like, it started with that test. The reason it's named after Eric Cressey is we literally worked with him to develop the test as like, what do we think will be the movements that will best correlate to performance for baseball, period. And, it was working with him, myself and Eric and some of the other members of our team and Sam, just to say like, these are what we think will matter. Right. And then what's really interesting is what we've just recently found out is within that test, there are certain movements that matter more than others, right? So if you really want to predict performance for baseball, what matters most is the PNFs and shot put and vertical jump for throwing, and for hitting, it's shot put, trunk rotation, and vertical jump. Those are the ones that matter the most. Those are the 3 movements for each. If we're talking about throwing velocity and then, exit velocity for hitting, those are the movements that matters most. Now there's still good correlations to performance with some of the other movements, but it's not nowhere near as strong as those specific ones. So now we even have on all of our systems a shortened version of the test that just has those specific movements, so that people can get through that test even quicker, right? Just do a 3 movement test. And you guys already know how efficient it was to do the whole Cressey test. Well, now let's say you're time crunch, you want to test something. Now you got 3 movements to do, right? Or 3 tests. It's really tests more than 3 movements, but you get the idea. So, it's something that we're constantly learning as we see these correlations to performance, as we get data from the field. We can make, we can make more conclusive, statements on and predictions about performance, but also make our testing more and more efficient.
The same thing applies to beyond just baseball. Of course, right? We've have tests across a variety of other sports, but we just released some a pretty comprehensive white paper called "The State of Power" that looked at the bigger picture of some of the normative data and how does power change as you age. So we even know things now like as you get older and by demographic, what are actually the movements that decline the fastest, right? And it happens to be rotational movements.
Rotation.
Rotation declines about 20% faster than sagittal plane movements as you get older. But there's all these incredible insights that we've gleaned from that. But the basis of the testing is it's definitely been it's definitely been kind of created very thoughtfully, but it also started with some guesswork and then many iterations and rounds of validation and refinement, and still a lot of ways to go. But that's one of the benefits our customers have of having a product that appreciates rather than depreciates, because they're constantly releasing new features and bringing more value. And so there's a lot more room to run there.
Mm-hmm. And with the large database that you guys have, is there a noticeable difference between guys come in with a lot of basic strength or acceleration, power, speed?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's actually essentially what we measure is when you do a Proteus test, at the end of your test, we basically look at your movements and we say, okay, how does this rank against our database for people like you? We look at power, acceleration, and velocity, right? And we go basically, okay, where do you rank against these? And then based on your test results, we can make recommendations on should you do strength training, power-based training, or speed-based training based on what you lack the most. So we take the relationship of power and acceleration, which is our primary metrics that we measure, and then we can look at those and say, okay, if you're deficient in power in particular, if you're very deficient on power, what's the first thing you need to do before you develop power? You got to develop baseline strength, right? Strength first, right? Okay, now you develop some strength, you spend some time in the weight room developing strength, power numbers go up. Well, now we're looking to see how does power relate to your velocity and acceleration. And if you are more powerful than you are fast, then we want to now start to work on that speed. So we're going to work more on the velocity side of things. So more on the lower end of the force velocity curve, really working on light resistance, explosive training, versus if you lack you have a lot more velocity, a lot more acceleration capabilities, but you lack power, then we're going to kind of work in the middle of that force velocity curve, work on kind of like moderate resistance, explosive activities. So we make a recommendation on every test result that you do on Proteus on how you should train to get better. Right. And that those recommendations are in the form of either a kind of just a list of exercises that we think you should do that happens on that. You can see that on the screen itself. Or as Sam mentioned earlier, we just released a program generator that will take that list of exercises and actually create a 4-week training plan for you, specifically hitting the velocity zones and the type of exercise selection that matter. So for strength, it's picking compound movements. It's telling you to, load it up with higher percentage of your 1RM. For power, it takes that, resistance down a notch, changes the reps and sets accordingly, and actually progresses that for you over the 4 weeks. So, that's something we do with every, with all of our flagship tests that we offer on the system, all of our, Proteus, we call them Proteus ecosystem tests or Proteus standardized tests.
And then do you guys toss in a lot of, using the VBT Tendo unit for people when they get that data back to say like, okay, we need to objectively move for power or for acceleration or for basic strength? Would you guys recommend, hey, use the Tendo unit for these athletes so we can, recognize?
Yeah. So we actually give a velocity range for each exercise. We give a velocity range that they should be training in. So for strength, it's below that 0.75 meters a second. For power, it's 0.75 to 1.25. For speed, it's above 1.25 meters a second. We actually put that in the programming. So if they have access to any type of VBT training, Tendo could be one of the camera systems, really anything, they can use that to their advantage. And don't forget, Proteus has VBT in it as well. In our freestyle mode, we actually have a VBT mode that actually you can set as the coach, hey, I want to stay in this, 0.75 to 1.25 range. They start working. If the athlete is going too fast, that means the resistance is too light and the coach can increase the resistance. If they're moving too slow, the resistance is too heavy. They can decrease the resistance. So, we give that in all the programs. We give that a suggestion in that same training recommendation space and in the programs that we generate.
In terms of, the athlete demographic coming in, in former podcasts that I heard, especially with Cressy, you guys mentioned that really the difference between, collegiate and professional just came down to skill, not necessarily their strength, power, or anything like that. Did you guys find a difference within the collegiate level between, freshman, sophomore versus that upper class, more, which you would consider to be the guys who are typically getting drafted? Was there a bigger gap in that space, or was there kind of a baseline there too?
I think we've looked at that. Well, have we?
Yeah, I don't think we've looked specifically at that. Like, okay, let's look at college and look at like like the way that we would do it in our database. We look at age. We wouldn't necessarily we don't have like freshman, sophomore, we don't divide it like that, but we could look at age. But what I can tell you that we have done already, and specifically at people that have done the Cressy test that are baseball players, that are of college age, so they probably are collegiate baseball players, is that there's a peak in power that tends to happen as they get to what you would consider that kind of senior age in college, around 21, 22. Like, we do know that power kind of tends to go up and peak in our data around that. And then, depending on, that's where we might have to get away from, being able to give you a definitive answer, but the power does tend to peak between that 20 to 25 age range. And then, it starts to decline a little bit or kind of like level off right there at that age. So my guess would be our data would show that those seniors would produce more power than the freshmen.
We'll nail it with that answer, but I think we're involved in a couple of and one very kind of notable new venture that is basically aiming to create almost like an athletic SAT, if you will, and involving a combination of measurement tools from like a TrackMan for exit velocity and throwing velocity to I think there's force plates, there's a brain component of it, timing gates, and a Proteus as the strength and power component of it, and so as some of these ventures evolve and continue to get a lot of momentum, we're very confident that a handful of these are kind of going to emerge to become standard assessments using a combination of these tools. In the process of this, we're getting a lot more detailed information that I think is going to answer some of those questions. And I think we're going to start to see more instances of these kind of physical assessment, reports and numbers and metrics and so forth start to make their way into college recruiting and pro scouting in a pretty exciting way, because I think there's a lot of meaning and there's a lot of depth has been established from a lot of these assessment tools, including Proteus. And now it's becoming, I think, it's much more accessible, and I think it's becoming more widely accepted. So I think there's some really, really interesting evolutions in this space that we're going to see that, represented in the form of changes in the market and changes to, what are normal, recruiting and scouting packages. What do those look like and what do they include?
Mm-hmm. And then this would kind of apply for Alex and I both when we played. I mean, Alex and I aren't necessarily genetic specimens when it comes to our height. I'm 5'9". I believe Alex is within that same range. This would have been an awesome tool to have done when I was playing to understand, does somebody of my caliber need more speed versus more power? And I know you guys have touched on that a little bit in previous podcasts, but just for the listeners here, would you be able to touch on, based on BMI or, just height alone, is there a certain, metric that these certain genetics, you should have? So meaning, there's like a 5'9" versus a 6'2" guy, which guy needs more acceleration, which guy needs more power, within your database. I know you've touched on that a little, but if you could expand here, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. I'll jump in and take that. We wanted to understand those differences because we had the theory that, essentially with height, with these longer lever arms, there's going to be greater opportunity to generate higher velocities, right? Which is, it's just because you have more time as a long lever arm individual to, accelerate your limbs for a longer period of time and therefore hit higher speeds, which is why you see a lot of tall pitchers, for instance. Tall, people who can throw fastballs typically are pretty tall people. And that goes, that's the same for lots of other sports as well, obviously, up to a point. So we wanted to see, does our data reflect that? And the way we'd look at that is we'd look at power, which is a combination of force and velocity, and we compare that to acceleration, which is how quickly does someone get to their peak velocity, right? And essentially what we found is that as athletes get taller, yes, their ability to produce power tends to go up. But if you're looking at someone who, two people that produce the same amount of power, what we found is that if someone is shorter, they have to produce greater acceleration to achieve the same power value. So essentially because they have shorter lever arms, they have to accelerate a lot more quickly in order to achieve that same velocity, right? Does that make sense? So if that's the case, then that athlete needs to fundamentally have a different approach to training if they want to hit some of those same numbers. So they need to focus a lot more on acceleration rather than, peak velocity or power-based training. So that means doing things that are helping them, start those movements very, very quickly, get to peak velocity very quickly, which usually means doing light resistance, explosive movements. They still, obviously, everyone still needs baseline strength, but if you really want to work on acceleration, that's what you need to work on is, light resistance, explosive movement. So a shorter individual is going to have an, going to benefit from that to a greater extent than a tall athlete.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point of like, different bodies are going to need to either make up in a certain way. A lot of guys are, their bony morphology is shaped differently to kind of accommodate for different movement patterns that are going to be more efficient or less efficient. And that kind of touches on the idea of like, there's no perfect mechanics or perfect like way to build a body. And so I think is a great tool to be able to identify like, all right, this is, where we're at in a lot of these different things, and understanding, okay, these are the things that you need to essentially outperform the norm to be able to make up for whatever else you might be lacking or whatever that is. And I'm curious if, on that kind of same idea or same lens, like, is there other, I guess, metrics that you've found that may differ between athletes, between different body types, between different types of movers, and how that relates to some of the data that you guys are collecting, and what are the things that they need to kind of outperform the norm in, if there is data on that?
So I'll just answer that too. Like another kind of concept here is, remember that you hit the nail on the head. Everyone's going to be different. And also for different sports, different movements, different metrics are going to matter more. So what's really interesting is, because our database collects height, weight, sport, position in the sport, all these different things, you can filter by that data to determine, and am I lacking in this metric compared to this cohort, right? Like maybe I'm in the 90th percentile for, power, but my acceleration is really low. And that's why I need to really focus on that. Or maybe I need to look specifically at people that are shorter that play my position. Where do I rank amongst them? If I want to be at the high level of them, I need to work on these metrics. That's going to fundamentally change how our data compares you, if that makes sense. So our tools allow you to do that. But then on top of that, obviously we're always trying to look for different interesting, relationships that we see. And, something that we have already seen is even looking at BMI, which is something that, a lot of athletes are told that, they're overweight, or they fall into that overweight category because they carry more muscle mass. And, it's kind of this tricky thing where they're saying, oh, you're overweight. But when you look at our data, overweight people are the most athletic people that we have. That's where power peaks, which is kind of an interesting kind of point. If you're an athlete, you kind of almost want to be in that overweight category because it means you have more muscle mass, which is what you need to achieve your sport outcome. Now, what we see in our data is they start to get into that obese area, it starts to level off, and then it starts to decline as the BMI goes up. So, that follows conventional logic. But if you're an athlete, that's just one other area where, you actually want your power numbers to go up and your body weight to probably be a little bit higher because you have more muscle mass and more lean tissue. So I'm not sure if that's exactly in the same category of what you're looking for, but that's definitely an interesting relationship that we've seen in our data that we've, found recently and been talking a lot about.
The sky's the limit here, because these are really new norms. And I think over the last 2 years, we've, reached a new kind of stratosphere in our ability to make sense of those and then present them in a way that's understandable. But there is so much, room to run here. We're definitely seeing the emergence of different archetypes, you could say, right, of athletes, right, and being able to, categorize them broadly in some way at a high level before digging in deeper to specific movement categories and so forth. We're definitely seeing that there's, depending on the demographic, there's a normal for, a bilateral power imbalance. and by movement, right? And baseball players, as you know, certain movements there's pretty significant bilateral imbalance, and those might not be abnormal so much, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff here. When you guys got your first Proteus experience, did you actually go through on screen the results? Did you get to kind of play around or share? I'm wondering, was that in it? I'm wondering, do you remember what the date was? I'm wondering if it was before we released this new update that shows the kind of the new.
I can tell you the date right now. It was on.
You guys did it in Maverick, right?
It was on August 7th. It was on August 7th.
Oh, August 7th. Okay, all right. So you did get to experience that, and then we'll share this again with you guys afterwards. But you can see what we're talking about when we say the shareable results and training recommendations with velocity ranges too. So that's a super important part of it.
Yeah, and we kind of got to see those and analyze those a bit. And I thought that was really great because it gives that kind of actionable feedback, and that's something that I think is really useful. And just like anything that's taking data, I think especially for athletes that aren't I guess as looped into the nuance of the the language of data collection and all that stuff. It's really hard for guys to kind of take that data and then understand, okay, what do I do with this? And I thought it was very, very useful being able to take that and then have like actionable feedback of like, okay, makes it very user friendly, specific, and easy to read of like, okay, these are the things you're lacking. And then now this is a roadmap to move forward. And I think that's, one of the big things that a lot of athletes need is, either they're not getting any data and they're just kind of like, moving at the kind of whims of whatever they're feeling, or they're getting data on where they're at and as an athlete, but they don't know how to take that data and move forward. So I think that's kind of a big hole that we're trying to fill as coaches is, all right, how can we give athletes actionable feedback and an actionable plan backed by data on, all right, how do we fill all these little holes that you're lacking in? And I think this is definitely a massive tool to kind of help guys along that path and fill that power, speed, and multiplanar movement hole that really hasn't existed.
Totally. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say, well, that's also something the product has evolved to give more of those the actual insights and steps. Because I think Sam, since you can speak to this too, but when we first started, we were just giving data. But a lot of coaches and a lot of practitioners were then kind of like, okay, this is cool data, but like, what do we do next? What do we do with this data? What does it really mean? And that's where we've really added a lot of these features on giving actionable steps, generating programs to make it really, really straightforward of, okay, here's your result. Now here's what you do.
One of our early adopter customers recently, I think it was last year, gave us a quote, and he called this Proteus like a cheat code for coaches, right? And that's really kind of what it does in a lot of ways. And I think because the presentation of it has become so improved, it's become really popular. We've got tens of thousands of high school and college athletes that use the product, and it's become really popular with that demographic for sure. And a number of our partner sites, use that to and kind of the outputs of the assessment as a revenue generator, not just from client acquisition and retention, but when you have a tool that you bring into your facility and you can offer basically comprehensive strength and power assessments, and then all you have to do is press a button and it gives you a multi-week program that you can do any adaptation you want to it as a coach, but you can also just deliver it right to an athlete. And all you have to do is 5 minutes test on Proteus and then press a button. There's a lot of value, not just in time savings, but that's actually being sold. Those types of combinations of assessment plus program or any of those permutations are being sold as, in packages that we're seeing range from anywhere from $50 to $250, depending on how it's So some of these like combine camps and so forth can be huge profit centers. And I think that ties to the point I was saying earlier about it's an investment that you make in Proteus, and it appreciates over time, which I think is really unique. And we got a lot of early adopters that will kind of back us up on those statements. So it's pretty exciting to see, and there's a really exciting roadmap ahead with what we're doing with this and how, and product extensions that deliver continuously more value.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the data is extremely valuable in that test where you could, I could see it being, or at least ideally implemented into combines for any sport, really, because we know some of the metrics like 60-yard dashes may not give us a very accurate representation of, how someone's going to steal a bag. But using these metrics, I thought were awesome. And there was another great thing that Alex and I kind of got to experience together, which was we kind of got to compete on the machine as well. And I think that if you had, training partners, if you're using freestyle mode, like that would be a great way to also get that in, because if you have a training partner in that aspect and they're doing something, pretty similar to you, or if the same, like, he and I were sweating, just like, come, I'm gonna beat you on this one. So that was a lot of fun to experience that aspect of the Proteus as well.
Yeah, the gamification of it, we hear that all the time. It's like you get this with the group and you get these guys. You look at our Instagram, you can see there's all kinds of videos we've posted or reposted of sites that are doing exactly that. They're like trying to see who can get the biggest number on their shot put or something like that. So it's definitely a fun way to keep people motivated. And look, you're measuring it right there so that the numbers don't lie, right? So it's easy to like turn that into a game and bring out the competitive nature.
Yeah, and I think that's so valuable for athletes. Something I preach a lot to athletes is being able to have data and have actual numbers saying exactly how you're performing an exercise or performing a movement, whether that be after the fact or while you're actually doing the exercise. I think it's so valuable because, I kind of said this earlier, is if you don't know where you are in the map, you don't know how you're going to get to where you need to go. And you guys can kind of touch on it if you'd like, but there's that importance of having actionable data that kind of, guides not just, the programming, but actually your actual effort in every rep that you're getting after, because, you see it where guys kind of get lost in the mundanity of training. And then when they're supposed to be working on, let's say, speed, they're really not moving fast enough to be working on speed or power or whatever it is. And you kind of lose that. But if you have that actionable data, even, rep to rep, every single rep you're getting after it, and then you're able to see those numbers, and with your training partner, see his numbers, and then compete, or just compete with yourself, seeing your own numbers. I think it's a total game changer to make sure that you are exactly where you need to be to get the stimulus that you want.
Totally. It's also really, powerful especially if you're a business operator, right? You're trying to prove the value of your services and the results. And if you can objectively point to that, it's very, very, very powerful. And for some of the sites that we work with that train younger athletes, where really like the parent is kind of the client, it's incredible parental proof. So it's a great way to show your value. And then now that we've got, I think, the specific metrics that have been established that recorded on Proteus that are directly kind of predictive of on-field baseball performance in several ways, which Will talked about in depth on that Cressy podcast. You can actually, there's a real reason to want to improve, if you're a baseball player, your shot put, right? Because that, what is it, Will, every 50 watts that you increase on the shot put translates to 1 mile an hour in exit velocity. That's compelling.
Exactly.
And the other thing go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just confirming. That's exactly, he hit the metric exactly on the right.
Yeah. So I was going to say, the other thing that I think is so valuable is, as coaches, the great thing, or PTs, or, any practitioner, the great thing about having data is it really holds you accountable. And it forces you to really look at the data and say, okay, are we moving in the right direction? And if we're not, then it's like, okay, we really need to rethink and fully, go through everything that we've been doing. And I think that's something that a lot of people kind of get lost in the everyday and they stop kind of holding themselves accountable and they're just kind of going through. And I think that's where you get, not the best care for people. And so I think it's so important in everything that you do, not just the speed, power, and force production, but everything that you're doing is like really reassessing and all the time, make sure that you have that data to kind of back up. And even if you're just an athlete kind of doing your own thing, it's really important to look at everything that you're doing in an objective way and understand, okay, am I moving towards my goal? And if I'm not, okay, now I need to rethink where is it that I'm missing that I need to start implementing, or where are the things that I need to remove from what I've been doing or change whatever, part of my routine it is that's going to help me get to that next level and start moving in the direction I want to move.
And I think most coaches and those people in the space, they know the importance of and want to do the reassessment and that, but I think one of the things that gets in the way is sometimes the complexity of it and the time, and how the end result might just not, it might be in, it's not comprehensive or it's lacking big pieces. Where I think we're starting to see a lot of traction is the kind of acceptance of and adoption of Proteus as a real solution that enables, very precise, rapid, very comprehensive strength and power testing. That is a huge unlock. When you can do that in 5 minutes or less, it's a huge unlock for coaches and ultimately the businesses with that directly benefits the athletes in the form of not just motivation, but the individualization that they need.
Yeah, and I think this is something that Jerry and I have talked a lot about since we had that demo. Is I think Proteus is so valuable in that it makes it one, it's easy to perform the test, but it also gives you that actionable, easy to read data. And so to kind of of course, we want to pitch to our own athletes, because something we've been talking about is until we have our own Proteus, we do want to incorporate Proteus into our assessments and being able to send a guy to maybe another facility that has it until we have our own or whatever. And so, this has been great, I think, to kind of pitch to everybody that we work with and everybody that's listening. It's like the importance of this, because I do feel like it's so valuable and something that we really believe in.
Awesome. I appreciate it. That's love how you guys are thinking about this. And it's great to, just be in the room with other like-minded people that see how this space is evolving and are ultimately leading the charge on how this entire human performance and sports performance space is like rapidly evolving. So it's an exciting moment in time for sure.
Definitely. Well, I think that's a good spot to kind of close it off and finish this conversation. It's been a great conversation. I think we've had some really awesome insights from you guys, and hoping that our listeners are able to take this and learn from it and kind of make things their own and improve in whatever they need to improve. Is there anything else that you guys want to kind of touch on or talk about?
No, just if anyone listener is interested in learning more, proteusmotion.com, PROTEUS motion.com. Click the blue button, says, I think, demo or get in touch, and fill out the form. And I highly recommend speaking with someone on our team, even for just 15 minutes. It will not just clarify a lot, you will learn things that you need to know. And that will at minimum be highly, highly interesting. And I think we'll help answer your questions. So do that. And then we've got Instagram and our social channels are at Proteus Motion.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure to have you guys on. And for all of our listeners, stay fearless.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Stay Fearless, the Fearless Sports Performance Podcast with all things baseball performance training. If you enjoyed this episode, please share, like, subscribe, comment, reach out to us, and keep the conversation going. you can check out our website at fearlesssportsperformance.weebly.com, and you can find us on Instagram at Fearless Sports Performance or on X at FearlessBSBL. Until next time, stay fearless.